In the darkest night, we find our light. Battered souls, but we won't lose sight. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, we stand tall. United forever. Strength and courage will overcome. Oh, surviving together, victorious, never, never alone. Hand in hand, we'll face the unknown.
We see you, we hear you, and we believe you. Hey everyone, how you doing tonight? You've landed at Surviving Together, a safe space for trauma survivors to connect and build community on their healing journey, as well as providing trauma-related education for all. I am coming down with a little something, so I'm sorry if I sound a little glucky, but I don't have to do a lot of the talking tonight, so that's a great thing. Um, let's see who's here so far, and then we'll bring our guest on. DeAudrey Gore is going to be listening until her meds kick in. DeAudrey, I completely understand. Misha probably doing more listening. Glad you're here, Misha. For those of you who don't know, that wonderful intro that you saw was created by our beautiful Misha. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Carmel is here. How are you doing, Carmel? I hope you are doing well. I'm glad to have everybody here, and Crystal is here so far. I know you guys will trickle in as the live, gets going and you get the notifications for it. So tonight we have a really interesting show for you. Um, this is somebody who I interviewed a while back, and we were able to schedule to have her on. She is coming to us from Australia, and we're going to be talking about, preventing childhood abuse. How do we do it? What are the things we need to consider? And kind of get her perspective as to the subject overall, but also, what does she see in Australia? Because I'm here in the United States, Carmel's in the Netherlands, uh, Crystal's in Canada, uh, DeAudrey's in Ireland, originally from South Africa. So we got people all over. So adding to the stage, Miss Kristi McVie, how are you? Good morning. Good morning, because I noticed early in the morning for you.
Yeah. Not too early, but it's pretty good.
That's awesome. So I think you could hear me. So that, our crew who's already here, we've got like 4 different countries already, 5 countries covered
Counting
here.
me.
Yeah, exactly. So as more people trickle in, we'll see, who else we get. We've got people in Mexico and in England, the UK, all over. So
Yeah.
I was doing some more research about, just different countries too, and I'm just so fascinated to have this conversation with you. But first of all, why don't you just introduce yourself as to, who you are, and then we'll kind of get into your background a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm over in Western Australia, near Perth, south of Western Australia, south of Perth, sorry. And I was a West Australian police officer for 10 years. And in that 10 years, I was a specialist child interviewer. So I used to interview children who had been sexually abused and abused to get their evidence for court. And I did that for nearly 9 years. And then I became a detective who investigated child sexual abuse and abuse, as well as other things, but that was predominantly what I did. And towards the end of my career, I was interviewing children, investigating their cases, arresting their offenders, and then also managing child sex offenders when they were released from prison. So my career of 10 years was pretty intense and pretty full on, but when I left the police, I did leave with PTSD, as you could imagine, from hearing, children's stories and the families and just feeling quite hopeless because
Mhm.
when police step in, it's after the fact, it's after something bad's happened. Police don't prevent a lot of crime in these cases. They're there to try and help people make sense of them, to hold people to account, but they don't actually prevent abuse. And it didn't sit right with me at all. So I actually was struggling and suffering from anxiety before I was diagnosed with PTSD. So, I'd have panic attacks before work, and I would be quite anxious at work all the time. I had some time off in the last year, and then when I got the PTSD diagnosis from my doctor, I came home and told my family, and my daughter, who was only 11 at the time, said to me, "Mum, I don't want you to do this job anymore. You're not the mum I remember." So it
Oh
had
my
affected
God.
my parenting, and it had affected my had affected my relationships. And she was just emotionally intelligent enough to be able to, emotionally intelligent enough to be able to just share how she felt. And in fact, I was, one of those people that knew that policing is just another job. It wasn't my
Mhm.
whole identity. I joined the police at 26, at 28. So had my daughter at 26. She was 2 when I joined, and she's more important. So I
Yeah.
went I went in the next day and resigned. And
Oh,
because my family
wow.
was more important. Yeah.
That
So
quick.
yeah, so I didn't even have to think about it. I think my body was trying to tell me for a long time that, what I
Mhm.
was doing wasn't working. So, but when you leave something like that, I actually felt a great honor and a great, like, to me, when a child told me about their story and they felt safe enough to tell me their story, and I helped hopefully make them feel safer. I It was the highest honor I could be given by anyone.
Right.
And I had such respect for the children and the families, and I had such respect for what I was doing, that it just didn't feel right when I left. I actually felt a lot of shame, and I felt like I was
Mm.
failing when I left.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the hardest things, is that trying to, my heart and my head were both in different parts of, like, my head was like, you can't do this anymore, but my heart was like, but this is what I'm meant to be doing. So,
Right.
you know, I had a bit of a break. I left just before COVID in March. I left in January 2020. COVID hit in March 2020. And yeah, it was probably not the best time for someone to be going through that kind of mental strain. I mean, a lot of people were going through it, but that's an added stress. But
Yeah.
when I did leave, I unfortunately, when you're in high anxiety, I'm sure you talk about, the trauma cycle, and if your anxiety is up here all the time, you're going to come crashing down. So then I was in a deep, dark depression, and thought about taking my own life and things like that. But,
Oh
my family
my.
kept me safe. Yeah, my family kept me here. So I'm very blessed, and also I think from what I'd seen and what I knew about mental health, and I was, had a lot of experience in mental health, uh, that I knew that it was only a stage. There was a light at
Mhm.
the end of the tunnel. My saying during that period was, "This too shall pass." Like, you
Right.
know, I knew that I just had to get to the other side, even though it was really painful. But uh, when I came out the other side of that kind of fog, um, I I then started writing how I was feeling and writing about what I knew, because when I was leaving, like I said, I felt so much guilt and shame, and I felt like I was letting everyone down. But the one thing that kept being was present in my mind was, if parents knew what I knew, they could do things differently. They could protect their kids. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of individuals can relate, is that it's not something we talk about. It's not something that is openly spoken about. It was always like pushed under the carpet, or, like, we don't talk about that. Don't be silly. We don't talk about that. Not in our family.
Yeah.
And we know that that's not the case. So it's, every family everywhere. And so it's not other people's families, it can be anyone's family. So I started writing everything down, and that was probably the best thing I could have done, because that's actually how I helped heal my mental health. I wrote my story. I wrote about everything I knew, and I created this book, and here we are, nearly 6 years since retirement. I now speak nationally in Australia. I present on stage. I do webinars, and I teach parents how to keep their kids safe as best
That
they
is
can.
awesome. That is awesome. And there's so many details in what you've just said that I want to poke at.
Yeah, sure.
Um, let's just start with a little bit of during your time in law enforcement and the types of cases that you were seeing from being in Australia. What I guess let me preface this and say in the United States, we have numbers such as, you know, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 girls are going to be abused by the time they're 18. And for boys, it's about 1 in 6. And most of those, 95% of them are going to be by somebody they know, whether it's a family member, immediate family member, or, coach, pastor, somebody like that. Overwhelmingly, the perpetrators are male. Overwhelmingly, still the uh, victims are female, although that's a little tougher to get our hands on in terms of numbers for boys, because there definitely still is that stigma of males reporting.
Yeah.
What did you see when you were in your tenure?
Yeah, I think worldwide, especially in what we consider more our European countries, and our America, the UK, Europe, and in Australia, in Australia, our stats, our most recent stats say 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys. And we know this because we just had this massive research project that studied, I think it was 6,500 adults over the age of 16. So all of these people, and they were able to get that data down. So in Australia, 1 in 4 adults has been sexually abused. So
Wow.
in their childhood, yeah. So 1 in 4. So we've got very good data at the moment in regards to this, and we know. And I say this all the time: if it's predictable, it's preventable, because we know this, therefore we can do better. And so, with regards to who does it, it's around 90 to 95% of all sexual abuse in Australia is also by someone known to the child. Like you said, with girls, there's stats that say it's around 47% are a male relative. So it can be, I think it's 25% is a extended or like a secondary family member. So uncles, cousins, grandfather.
Right.
It's about 15% is father or stepfather, and then it's about 6% brother or stepbrother. So we have those stats.
Wow.
And then with regards to reporting, it's on average 24 years for girls and 30 years for boys. They were between offence and first disclosure to someone.
Okay.
99% of males will never tell police. 84% of women will never tell police. So we know this through the surveys and stats that we have in Australia are all, adults coming forward and giving their, and we've had multiple royal commissions. We've had multiple, other research stuff. We've got lots of research in this space in Australia, thankfully.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome, but it's also not great because it's not getting better, really. One thing that we have seen recently is there's been an increase in child-on-child harm. So we know in the last 15 years, children were predominantly, before the 15 years prior, they were predominantly offended against by adults. That was their largest offending group. But now we're seeing that children have become the higher harming each other. We call it harmful sexualized behaviors in Australia. So because, children, as much as we like to portray that, if unfortunately, they harm each other, and not all children understand what they're doing. So, without being really putting a label on children, because until they get to a certain age, they don't actually understand a lot of what's going on, or if they understand it, they children are they're driven by behavior, and same as people who are dopamine and feeling good feelings and stuff like that. So there's a lot of nuance to that side of things. So so in Australia, we're pretty much on par with what you're seeing in the US.
Just as a comparison, the disclosure stats that you stated, the timelines, that's very similar to what I have seen with the US. It's usually about 25 years for women,
Yeah.
about 30 years for males. And there was something else. Oh, the increase in peer on peer. And I have been seeing this in every country that I've been looking at. They are seeing an increase, some more than others.
Yep.
But all of them are seeing, this increase. And I think a lot of it has to do with the availability of online material.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's always been there. Peer-based abuse or child-on-child
Mhm.
harm has always been there. We know that from talking to survivors, right? But what we saw, and when I was starting in the police in 2010, when I was interviewing kids, a lot of the children harming other children had been physical victims of abuse. So they had been abused by an adult, then they go on to harm another child doing what's been done to them, right?
Right.
But towards the end in 2020, when I was interviewing children, I was finding that less were being harmed. It kind of exploded. All of a sudden, we were seeing children harming other children all of a sudden, and we were like, whoa, surely there's not more of this happening. But then, like, abuse to the children, and what it was the access to online content, and the availability of online content was, they were seeing things that they weren't age appropriate or ready to see. They didn't understand it, and they were again, what they see, what they do. Kids are great mimickers of what behavior and things they see, so they were doing it to each other. Then it becomes like a spread of it. I liken harmful sexualized behaviors to a virus. One gets it, then the other one gets it. It sort of happens until someone interrupts that behavior. So
Right.
we saw that was in 2020, and even it's continuing as
Mhm.
and evolving as from 20 in the last 6 years. It's getting worse. So
Yeah,
this
unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, so this is why prevention education is so important, and adults, parents stepping up as that protective space to be able to talk to kids and to have their children speak to them, because it prevents abuse or reduces harm, long-term harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on that just a little bit more, but Crystal asked a question and she was asking about what are the stats on women as abusers? Do you have
Yeah,
information
current
from
stats in
UK?
Australia current stats around Australia, and is around 10 to 12%. So uh,
Wow.
we would have said, in my experience, it was around 90 to 95% male abusers to female abusers, but there was some research recently that said it's around 10 to 12% of female abusers. In fact, on my podcast yesterday, I interviewed someone who was abused from 5 years old from females. So he was, which is going to be a really interesting podcast to come out in the new year. He explained how he was groomed, how his abuse progressed, how these female offenders, like the type of people they were,
Mhm.
because it's not something a lot of us talk about. So, but with regards to any kind of person attracted to children, or who are opportunistic and abuse children, there is definite signs of people, if they go that way, that they will go into jobs like teaching, childcare,
Mhm.
all of those spaces where they can be close to children or they can have access to children. And this person was saying that he was babysat by
Yeah.
and so they're the type of people that are really friendly, and so there's a correlation between that grooming behavior and offending, and it can be women. And I don't, when I do education, I try not to gender it, because
Mhm.
I know that women offend. In fact, my
Right.
last child interview when I was just before I resigned, and I forgot to mention that, because what actually happened was is I did an interview with two little girls, and I remember specifically at the end of the first interview of these two little girls, I said to the partner that was there. So I was a detective, but I was interviewing children. And when we interview children in Australia, we're plain clothes. No one can tell that, the children, it's meant to be, we're not police,
Mhm.
we're just people talking to kids.
Mhm.
But in order for the interview to be well done and to be admissible for court, you need a detective as well watching the interview to make sure that you don't miss anything. And so this interview, I had a detective there, a female detective there, and I remember specifically saying to her at the end of the interview, because it was her mother who had been abusing her, as well as her stepfather. They were doing it together and individually. I just remember saying, this is going to F me up.
Mhm.
And then the next day I was like completely having this breakdown. And I think it was, my brain was like, I'm done
You're
and I
enough.
can't
That's
do this
enough.
anymore.
Yeah.
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 And I think that affects me more. I don't know why,
Yeah.
but it does.
Well, last incident, the one that pushed you over, and I can, understand that. And I was going to ask you about that because the it's hard getting stats on female abusers in the US from what I've been seeing, and also the breakdown between how many of them are solo abusers versus working in
Yeah.
partnership with
And
each
that happens
other.
a lot. The partnership stuff happens a lot, that they enable abuse, they facilitate the abuse. Sometimes they are, they're just like passive. So they're
Mhm.
still part of the abuse, because I had one case when I was in the child abuse squad where it was parents had abused their kids, their children, but the mother actually ended up getting jail time, because although she wasn't the physical abuser, she had
Mhm.
enabled it the whole time, and
Right.
used to say things like, I don't feel like it going with the daughter. So, she had
Oh my
created that
goodness.
space. Yeah, it was horrible. The mother got like a fairly hefty jail sentence. So did the father, when it was finally in court and
Yeah.
everything. But yeah,
That goes from enabling to facilitating to me,
yeah,
that's
yep,
that next step up.
yeah.
Wow.
And
Incredible.
sadly, online predators and people who are, we've got some research in Australia now that show that predators are trolling. So the best term I can use, trolling
Mhm.
apps like Tinder and like dating apps to find single parents to enable abuse of children. So there's some data that
Gain
shows that
access to them.
they actually for mums, single mums on dating sites, they will pretend to be a potential partner. For single dads on dating sites, sometimes they'll approach them to create child exploitation material. So there is an actual thing happening in that space as well.
Wow. Well, it kind of rolls into one of the things that I want to talk to you about is let's speak about the vulnerabilities. I mean, we know that everybody can be a perpetrator and that everybody can be, I should say anyone can be, or it's across all demographics,
Yeah.
perpetrators and victims. But what in general are the characteristics that you saw with um, not only the survivors or the victims,
Mm.
but I also want to talk about the perpetrators as well, because I know that
Mm.
the recent study that came out had listed some of that information, which I found very interesting.
Yeah. So in regards to perpetration, look, it's not everyone, but it can be anyone, basically.
Yeah,
And
thank
that's what
you
you were
for
trying to
yes,
say. Yeah,
exactly,
it's
exactly.
not everyone, but it can be
Not
anyone.
everyone
And
can be any
and
right.
and the one thing that was probably an eye opener for me when I first stepped into this space was that, we tend to think when you say the word pedophile, you've got this image in your head of someone in a white van handing out lollies, flashing kids kind of thing, right? And that's what the average person has in their mind, is that they get, unless they know better, they generally think that it's someone, a stranger. And we know that it's mostly someone in the home, in the family, in their world, someone we've introduced to our children, family friend, etc. And so what was interesting in the research that you mentioned, there was some research, and again, it will need to be we need more research in this space, but there was an anonymous survey of over, I think it was 1,600 men, and the research was anonymous. Like I said, they could not be identified. And in that research in Australia, they were asked questions around, if some of the questions were like, if no one was to find out and you could not get in trouble, would you have sexual contact with a child under the age of 16, 14, 12, 10, younger? So these questions were, so these are the questions that they were asking these research participants. They asked them lots of questions. Some of the research participants' questions were like, what is your income? What have you got family? Do you use your social media? So it was a really broad, and it was around the attitudes of Australian men and child sexual abuse. And what that research found was a lot of the offenders who had offended against children they admitted to offending against children because it was anonymous and they couldn't get found out. It was 1 in 10 had contact offended against children. And in that, they found that most of them were over the age of middle-aged by the time that they had contact offended, and they had earned more than $150,000. Most of them had families, children, had jobs. They were 3 times more likely to work with children or have a job that put them in contact with children. They watched more porn and aggressive porn, so they were higher rates of paying for pornography. So and so because they had the money there to do it. So there was a whole there was a whole type there that basically were identified as these were the people who were most likely to offend against. So when you look at it, and then it was found that 1 in 6 Australian men had an attraction to a child or admitted to being attracted to children.
Wow.
And if they weren't to be found out, they would offend against a child. The interesting thing is there was a subsection of questions that was around, have you looked at child exploitation material? And one of the questions was, did you want help for that? And would you like to be, if no one was if you were not to get in trouble and you could get help, would you get help? The subsection of men in that group who had watched child exploitation material and had said that they would like to get help for it were under 30. So we've got, and in my experience, what I'm seeing now is that we are seeing like young people being groomed by pornography, and pornography leads to child exploitation. And we do have research, I can't remember where it's from, that says that someone who watches child abuse material and child exploitation material has a 50% higher chance of going and seeking out a child. So we're increasing the risk of harm to children at a younger age because young people are being groomed by it. Their inhibitions are being, when you're watching stuff like that, you think that it's normal. It's become normalized, especially to a young brain. So I think that it's leading towards us having an explosion of child abuse because of the fact that young people have so much access online.
Well, and it just goes back to, that increase in peer on peer that we're seeing. And if they're not when they're young, when they're peer later on in life, that, it can just continue there.
It's not their fault. Like us as this has been going on, these apps and programs and this software and these companies, they're leading all of this harm. And it's not, we can't blame kids for the fact that, whilst they're on an app, they're getting pop-ups for lives, live shows and pornography, and some kids are going to click on it, and
It just shows you the need for parental involvement, for
yeah,
societal involvement to be able to step in, and the education piece to be able to say, listen, guys, this is not what is okay, what
yeah,
this is not a
exactly,
healthy relationship, and to be
exactly.
able to kill it then. I was just reading a study that was done in, I believe it was the end of 2023 or mid 2024, from Scotland, and
Mm,
it is actually mirroring a lot of what you're saying. It's wealthy, older, married men
yeah,
who are watching pornography, and particularly watching violent pornography,
correct.
and um, generally have some self-esteem issues, some depression issues. A lot of times were abused as a kid themselves in some form or fashion.
Yeah, it's not
This is this
necessarily sexual abuse, it can be adverse
exactly.
childhood abuse, so
Yes,
it can be
yes,
physical, domestic violence, etc. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, any of your aces. And so it's just interesting to see that these characteristics are carrying over
Yeah.
to at least the Western European countries. And I would imagine it's probably going to be very similar within the US
I'd
and
imagine so.
Canada.
I mean, look, I'm not saying that child sexual abuse doesn't happen in every socioeconomic status or area,
No,
but
these are just
what
it's what the research is showing.
yeah, but what I will say is this, and my experience is that higher people with a higher income and higher socioeconomic status are hide it better.
Mm,
So we automatically think that the people that don't have a lot of money and they might not have the, like they come from a lower socioeconomic background, they are the ones that are dealing with abuse, and but it's happening everywhere. Domestic violence happens everywhere. Children get neglected in every type of family environment, every culture, every religion,
yes.
everywhere. We know that, and this is the thing about child sexual abuse or abuse of any kind. It's because, not because, but we can't just think that it happens to other people. It happens everywhere.
Yeah.
And we need to stop this belief that it's not us, it's not our family, it's not our people. And yeah, it's so much easier to hide when you've got money and you've got status, and people just don't. And child sexual abusers are very good at manipulating adults, and they're very good
Hmm.
at manipulating systems. So they can be, they can make it seem like they're the good guy when they're not, or a good person and they're not. But one thing I will say is, if you want, I can explain the 3 different types of child sexual offender that we know of. They're expanding on this, but this has been the kind of framework that they've worked on for a long time. So in my
Yeah,
experience, and yeah, sure.
just before you do that, I just want to interject, and I think it makes sense, and we see this over and over again, right, with this um, general societal attitude that somebody who has more wealth, who has a good job, then is being well paid. They're probably at least fairly smart because they've been able to get some sort of good stable income. They're married, they've got good family life, they're presenting everything that's well respected on the front, right? And
Yeah,
so from the outside, people looking at that said, "Oh, that guy's so nice, he's so well respected, how could that be?" Right?
yeah.
And it's
It's
breaking
harder to
down that,
believe.
yeah, it's breaking down that barrier and going, it could be him, it could be him, it could be him, it could be him, it could be any of your neighbors. And just because they don't look like, or you've had a good interaction with them,
Mm,
doesn't mean right behind the curtain, what's going on in their mind isn't something, very dark.
exactly,
And
exactly.
yeah, us
And
realizing
I've
that as
seen
a
that.
society.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
historically, we trust, and the thing is they go into, a lot of them go into positions of trust and authority over others, because
Hmm.
that fills a need in them, but then obviously that gives them access to people that they can manipulate and abuse. So
Hmm.
That's one thing that I struggled with because I was dealing in the child abuse squad. I was dealing with a lot of cases that were historical cases against the Catholic Church, and I was like, but
Mm,
why? Or they were, like a church figure, or they were a figure in the community, even police officers,
mhm.
even judges, even everyone.
Right.
Not everyone, but it can be anyone. So the thing is that it's
Exactly.
not, you can't judge someone by what they show you. It's by
Mhm.
what they, as in what they, the face or the mask that they wear. It's about the behavior that they actually display when they don't think you're looking. So
Exactly. 100%.
behavior is a form of language in my world, and it
Mhm.
tells you 100% more than what they say out of their mouth. So
Right.
but yeah, when it comes to child sex offenders, you've got your predatory offender, which statistically is more likely to be attracted to male boys, and they have that they're basically attracted. They don't find attraction in adults, so that's
Mm,
considered. They've got like a real belief that children, like they're in love with children. They're the type of
mhm.
people we see in I saw a lot of like coaches, and they're giving up a lot of their spare time for child-based activities or to be
Mhm.
around children. They can't sustain and maintain adult relationships with a
Mm,
partner
mhm.
and things like that generally, because they've got no attraction to adults. Then you've got the next one, which is the opportunistic offender, which is someone who can have an adult relationship because they can be attracted to adults, but then they have an attraction to children, and so they generally are parental figures, cousins, like the grandfather sort of thing. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that not every sex offender will offend against every child. And I will go into some of the grooming stuff in a minute, but they sometimes will they'll pick and choose based on whether that child is
Mhm.
at vulnerable, uh, open to their advances, etc. But the opportunistic offender, I see lots of these people, or saw lots of these people. They'd be targeting single mums. They'd be targeting
Mhm.
they'd be targeting people who were vulnerable and had kids, or whatnot. Sometimes even targeting grandparents who maybe were caring for their grandchildren, and
Mhm.
like they'll get into relationships with parents, or if they're not already in a relationship with a parent, with another person, and having kids together. And
Mhm.
then the last type is situational offender. So they are generally not attracted to children. There's no attraction, but something happens in their life that they're out of control. Say they might lose their job, they might lose their relationship breaks down, and they have a brain like a snap, and then they abuse. So
Mm.
it's about power and control versus an attraction, that kind of thing. So
Right.
I liken those offenders to, in Australia, sometimes this happens where, thankfully not as much as it could, but if someone breaks into a home, there's an occupant, they're a female occupant, and they're alone, and then they get sexually abused or sexually assaulted. So it's not that they broke into that house for that reason. They broke in to steal something, but then they
Mhm.
saw the opportunity and they took it. And
Mhm.
situational offenders are the types that basically all of a sudden they're just looking for power and control, and to feel good about themselves, and take abuse someone for that. So the thing is when we have these different types of offenders, it's hard to be able to like they just don't look like an offender. That's why they don't have like a label on their face, right?
Right.
And that's why people get so confused when it comes to light that something's happened, or we find out about it.
Yeah, you hear all the time the neighbor, the coworker saying, "Oh my gosh, I never would have thought.
Yeah.
Never
He
would
was
have
so nice, or she
suspected."
was so nice, or they were so nice, or they were the
Exactly.
favorite teacher in the school. Every kid loved them, or their favorite
Mhm.
educator, or whatever they are
The
to
best
the
coach in
kids.
the world,
Yeah.
all the kids on the team love that coach.
You
And
get more flies
like
with honey.
yeah, and well, like you were saying, I mean, let's take a coach situation, right? All those kids could love that coach. That coach could be great to all those kids, but perpetrators, they're skilled at picking out those vulnerable ones. What
Yeah.
can I offer that child, um, or that mother, or that single dad or whatever, to get access to this child. Those kids who have low self-esteem, who don't have a lot of
Yeah.
parental supervision, who don't have a lot of friends, and they are just excellent at being able to pick them out. So yeah, out of 50 kids on the team, 49 of them could think that this person is the bee's knees, and to that one child who they have chosen, and then chosen to groom, it turns into a nightmare.
It's a kind of a, perpetrators will love bomb the child. They will become like their best friend. They'll bring in that secrets and like, this is just between us. And and they do. In-person grooming can be quite slow. It depends on the child. It can take a while,
Hmm.
and before they get abused. But it can also be quick, depending on whether the child, a child who grows up in, maybe their home situation isn't so great, right? And so I talk about, in prevention education, we talk about early warning signs and what's it feel like in our body to feel unsafe. And a
Hmm.
child who grows up in a home that might not have the safest environment all the time, there could be fighting, there could be, things being thrown, and it's normal for them. So the reason why a lot of children who come from, those adverse, the ACEs type homes where
Right.
there's physical or sexual, like there's physical or neglect or the emotional abuse, is
Abuse.
because a lot of the times their warning signs aren't functioning fully, like because their warning signs don't tell them that this person is actually unsafe, because they're used to being unsafe and they're
I
used to
never
it.
thought of it exactly like that, about the person not feeling safe, their body signals, that
Yeah,
aspect of it.
yeah, they
Um,
can't recognize them because it's normal.
yeah,
And
yeah.
or some form of normal. Like, one of the things that I've struggled with since leaving the police, is that I was on hypervigilant. I was always alert. I was always, my anxiety was always quite high because I had to be on all the time. And since
Mhm.
leaving the police, so since leaving the police, what's actually happened is that it takes me, when I'm calm and everything's quiet and everything's, like I've got nothing to fix, I actually feel really uncomfortable and I feel unsafe, because
Mhm.
my body says that I'm unsafe because it's used to,
Mhm.
being at this level of anxiety all the time.
Yes.
And so that's where I feel safest. But interestingly, I think I fell into policing. Never wanted to be a police officer when I was a kid. Nothing like that. I just saw an ad and thought, my daughter was 9 months old, and I thought, hey, that's a cool job. I could do that. But when I look back at my childhood, which was rather unsafe, had a lot
Mhm.
of alcohol abuse, drug abuse, a lot of things like that. I I was used to high anxiety. I was used to fixing things for everyone, being on alert,
Mhm.
checking in with my parents, being the good child so that I wasn't in trouble.
Right.
So that I was already preconditioned to
Yeah.
that level of anxiety that I would need in the police.
Mhm. That makes a
So
lot of sense.
yeah.
What are some of the things then that, um, you tell parents in terms of not only education for themselves, but what they can say to their kids, and how they can talk to their kids as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting, when I was writing my book, I was like, it all became clearer to me. I mean, when I was a police officer, we would talk to parents about, this, they groomed you, and we would talk to the kids about, after their interviews, whether they disclose something or not. We talked about a couple of things. First one was, who's on your safety network or who's on your safety team? So, which 5 adults can you talk to about anything, and that they will help, make you feel safe again, and they will believe you if you tell them something. So, try
Mhm.
and list 5 adults, right? And then the second thing was the early warning signs. These were the two things that I did every interview after the interview. What are your early warning signs? And I would go through, and we would talk about, if I feel unsafe, sometimes I get a tummy ache, I get butterflies in my stomach, I get a headache, I get my knees start shaking, I might feel like I can't talk, or I might freeze. And so
Mhm.
I would teach, so we would teach kids about that every time. And it was when I left the police and I learned what we were already teaching protective behaviors. So the cool thing about this situation is I had a daughter that was so young at the time, that hi, from just down the road.
Ah,
I had a daughter who was only 2 or 3 years old when I started this journey. So everything I learned in the police, I was doing with my child. Everything I spoke about with kids, I would speak about with her. And so when I was
mhm.
writing my book at the end, I started writing like how to have conversations with your kids. And I actually created, just in the last 2 years, a card pack called Conversations with Kids, and it's just got a few like little cards in there to like have a conversation and start the conversation. Like,
Like
what does
little
it feel like?
prompts.
Yeah, little prompts. Yeah,
So
and a
that
little
is just
explanation.
awesome.
Yeah, but this is why the
Great
reason why I did
idea.
it. Yeah, the reason why I did it was because parents kept saying to me, "I don't know what to say. I don't want to scare them." And
Yeah.
the beauty of this is, I've tested this on so many kids, but the beauty of it is that we don't actually have to talk about abuse, but to be able to prevent it, because we use words like inappropriate, unsafe, safe,
Mhm.
appropriate, privates, publics, and so we talk about things like, what are our private parts, what are our public parts, what can, private parts are our mouth and anything that's covered by our bathers or our underwear,
Mhm.
and a mouth is a private part, right? We can't forget that. So, and what are our public parts? Our arms, our legs, our feet. Anyone's allowed to see those, but private parts are just for me. And no one's allowed to
Mhm.
touch my private parts, take a video or photo of our private parts, and we're not allowed to touch other people's. So when we teach that to little kids or young people,
Yeah.
we're basically giving them the words, the tools, and we're able to help them understand if someone's like breaks that body safety rule, or that body, that rule. One of the body safety rules is no one's allowed to touch or see our private parts. And if anyone ever tries to or does say, "Can I please see your private parts, your penis, your vagina, whatever the word is that we use," um, you come and tell someone on your safety team, one of those 5 adults. So,
Right.
and
And
it's just opening their up.
I think it's such an important point because we I've made this point before, and it was something that, when I had my own child, that I was, adamant that I was going to be doing with them is, how can we expect kids to come to us and tell us about something if they don't have the words, if they
Exactly.
don't know what is not good, if they don't know how to explain, what they're feeling something, but they don't know how to explain it. Oh, that's the I'm feeling unsafe feeling. Now I have words to be able to say to somebody.
Yep.
And I know that then when I have that feeling, I should say something to
Yep.
somebody. We have to give kids the vocabulary to be able to speak. And it's not a one and done, right? I mean,
No,
this is a
it's multiples.
conversation that has to be done throughout their childhood as they grow and as the subjects evolve that we need to speak to them about. And
Yeah.
you know and I think porn now is one area that I was just reading a study, and they said the kids that are starting to watch porn are getting it to be on average as young as 10 in some countries.
Yeah. And
And
younger. I
so
mean, that's the average.
this is a conversation that needs to be happening, where this is not a conversation that most people A have with their kids. B, if they do, they're going to wait until they're late teenagers or dating age.
Already too late.
Yeah. So this is something that we as parents need to be, speaking, because we cannot rely on our schools, right? Because
Well, no,
it's
and it's not their
so
job to
varied.
protect our kids all
No,
the time.
it, for one, exactly, it's not their job. But for two, we have learned, because you were telling me stuff about Australian schools and things that are allowed there that are not allowed in schools in some places in the United States, which just blew my mind that that was the case.
Yeah.
But is, just depending on where you are, what's going to be allowed to be taught. And I just want to touch on that real quick because you said consent education is mandated.
Yes, it's mandatory. Now,
That is,
it's only just happened in the last 2, 3 years.
that's
So,
incredible. That's
yeah, I mean,
absolutely incredible.
it's because we know that if we're not talking about consent, and consent is everything. Hey, is it okay if I take this photo of us? Is it okay if I put this photo on my socials? Is it okay if I help change your nappy? Is it, like we're asking consent. We should be asking consent because we don't own our children or anyone else, right? So
Mhm.
it is just respectful to ask for consent. But we know that people don't think like that. We're not thinking like that anymore. We don't have that
Mhm.
respect because it's not taught to us. So now they're teaching it in school.
I just think that that's absolutely incredible.
It's
I
a
know I shared
necessary thing.
100%. I agree with you. And I wasn't able to get a lot of specifics because it's so varied in the United States and can be very varied within even within a state as
Mm.
to what's allowed in each school district. But I was able to find out that in Colorado, they cannot teach consent. They cannot. In the
It's
This is the
ridiculous.
state thing. And I was just like,
Consent is every day,
I'm like,
everything we
this is
do.
Colorado. I would expect it if it was one of the more, really conservative, states or something, but I was kind of blown away by that. And yeah, so we absolutely cannot rely on or leave it up to somebody else to do it. We have to take on that responsibility as parents. And to have community, programs that kids can get the information from because we know not all parents are going to be
No,
involved or
that's
feel
right.
comfortable talking about it.
It has to be a team effort because there's not a lot of,
Mhm.
like, some parents won't talk about this stuff. Some kids won't have this education. So yes, it does have
Right.
to, and we do have mandatory protective behaviors or body safety education in schools as well. So one of the things that I think is happening in Australia is that we're seeing a higher amount of child abuse or child sexual abuse reports. So it seems like it's gotten worse, but what's actually happening is our education is working because
Right.
kids are being taught consent. Kids are being taught that, no one's allowed to touch our private parts and we're not
Mhm.
meant to touch other people's. And so they're telling people. And we talk
Mhm.
to one of these 5 people and, these are our private parts and whatever. And we don't keep secrets. And secrets are, things that make us feel uncomfortable or scared. And it involves, your private parts, etc. And so people aren't, kids are just learning and the education's working, and that's why we're seeing more disclosures. But again, one of the things that told me that this works, and I mean, I've got my research is one child, but my daughter, she last year she was had a friendship group. She was in year 11. She had a friendship group of 6, 7 girls, and she was the only one who hadn't been sexually abused in that group. And which is
Wow.
high. That's a high number of kids who've had some form of sexual abuse against them. I was quite shocked, but she said for some reason, that I think it was because they were talking about me and it all came up and like they felt
Mhm.
safe to disclose. And so almost, yeah, all 6 or 7 of them, bar my daughter, had been sexually abused. And I'm not saying that, she hasn't been exposed to pornography and she hasn't been exposed to sexualized behavior, but she knew to speak up. She knew to come to me. We had conversations. We talked about it. We put in
Right.
protective interruptions. I made her feel safe again, and it hasn't. So as far as I know, it hasn't affected her. So like the thing is that that's one of the other things, is that they will be exposed to stuff.
Mhm.
It's inevitable. But when a child feels empowered and in control,
Yes.
it leaves less of a mark.
And I think that I saw this within, my own experience. Again, I only have one, right? But
Yep.
when he was in his mid-teens, his friend group, there was somebody who was being groomed, basically.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning stages, but his friends all pointed out to this person, hey, dude,
That's not okay.
this is not seeming like it's, yeah, I know he seems like he's friendly and he's giving you things, but
Yeah.
this is kind of classic, and so they had the knowledge and they had the words,
And
and
they
so
helped each other.
they were able within their own friend group to say,
Yeah.
let's cut this off. So, I mean, to me, that just shows the value, of education. That's just not only, once something happens,
Yeah.
disclosing, to an adult. These are kids helping kids.
Yeah, and they
So,
do. They talk about this
yeah,
stuff. They share this stuff. A lot of the disclosures and abuse cases that I worked on were, it wasn't that they disclosed to a parent or an adult, they disclosed to a friend who told their parent or adult. And so
mhm.
that was, how it came to light, because they were talking to their friend about the fact that, something was happening and they didn't know what to do about it. So when we
Oh,
empower
yeah,
our children, we're empowering other children along with them so that they're protected and they're safe.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's just an incredibly important point to make. Um, Hang on a second. I wrote a little list, and I want to make sure before I jump on to another subject, that I don't that I've covered kind of what I wanted to hear.
Cover.
Yeah, yeah. I think we've kind of gotten with that. It it just goes. I just want to say, as a last, in terms of preventing child abuse, that education really is our key, right?
Yeah.
We have to empower the kids. We've got to bring the parents into it.
Yeah.
And as we're seeing the increase in peer on peer, as we're seeing the increase in just, I'm almost wondering if the age is going to start decreasing for first contact with a child is going to be decreasing at all
It
because
already
of
is.
this pornography thing.
It
Yeah,
already
it
is.
it just, so the earlier that we can get in there and be talking to kids and talking to young adults and, making sure that they understand their body and they understand what consent is. Um, because we've been talking about, younger children, but I think about the pornography aspect, in kids who are just starting out dating, right?
Mm.
Or just
Yeah.
starting out having their first sexual experience, which we know happens much younger than probably a lot of us, would like
Wish
it
and
to
hope.
happen. Yeah, as we're older now, we, say, oh, it'd probably be good if it,
Yeah.
but it happens. So we have to prepare the kids and again, do what you see.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
what
also, we don't, for some reason, as adults, we think, because they're our little babies and they're our little people, and we don't want to think of them as sexual or sexual beings, or that they are interested in that to begin with. But we know that through puberty, sex
right,
hormones increase, become much more aware of their sexuality, and aware of other people, and aware of the whoever they're attracted to or whatever they're attracted to. And so we think that, okay, 18, when they're
yeah,
an
yeah,
adult, but it's more like 10 or 11 years old, and they're starting to have feelings, and they're
yeah,
starting to notice each other, and they're starting to think about things. And I have a really good friend over here who teaches, goes around and teaches about sex ed, right, and consent. And she says, like, long before we think they're ready, they're already thinking about these things. So,
mm-hmm,
who do you want your child to learn about sex from? Do you want them to learn
mm-hmm,
about it from porn peers or predators? Because that's who they're going to find it from if you don't step up and teach it to them. And
right,
and the next part to that is that. Do you, like, she puts it so well, and I'm not doing her justice, but she said, we don't want to think about it, but everyone wants their kids to be happy, healthy, and safe when they're an adult, right? Our job as parents is to help our children go from birth to adulthood as safest as possible, but with life skills that will protect them and keep them safe and make them ready for adulthood, right? That is our job. We have to teach them, and body safety, consent education, talking about pornography and talking about sex is part of the life skills that they're going to need, because if no
And
one
healthy
tells them,
relationships,
healthy
right?
relationships, what is normal, what is not normal, what's safe and unsafe, what's
Yes,
do you know that this is coercive? Like, no one should ever make you feel this way. No one should ever tell you what you can and can't do, or who you can and can't see. It's not normal for someone to track your phone and to be checking in with you 100 times a day. Yet
right.
if we're not having those conversations, our children don't know any better, and that's where they're getting led
Exactly.
to these violent and sometimes really damaging relationships and things. But this happens so much younger. I've been having these conversations with my daughter since 8 years old about sex, about pornography, about healthy relationships, about all
Yeah.
of these things. And you know what? I think, I'm not saying I'm a parent of the year here, because I'm definitely not. But I know that my daughter has, she even says, I feel ready. I feel ready for adulthood. I feel ready to be, I can't afford to live on my own, but I'm
Right,
ready to be
right.
on my own.
I think we discovered our kids are about the
About the
same
same age.
age. Right. And when it's probably a year, well over a year ago now, that I did uh, a thing on kids on porn, and that we're kind of in the biggest social experiment age right now, because this is, Gen Z really is the first generation is being brought up totally having access to it. And talking about healthy relationships and, everything beyond sex that goes into a healthy relationship. But from the sexual part itself, what is a healthy sexual relationship? Not just what is sex, right? What
What
is a
is
healthy
healthy?
what is healthy? And I asked him, and he was 17 at the time. So I remember this. So it's got to be almost 2 years ago now. Um, and I asked him, I said beforehand, I said, what do you think? I'm not stupid enough to think that you've never seen porn, right? But I've
Yeah.
been talking to my son about, private parts and all of that kind of stuff since he was, knee high as
Yeah.
well. And I think those of us who are trauma informed and who are
Yeah.
in this space are much more likely to be, at it when, kids can talk, they can
We're
start
not
getting
scared
this
of the
type of education.
we're not scared of
Huh?
the conversation. We're scared of the repercussions of not having it.
Right. We see it, and we see what effect having those conversations has. And I
Hmm.
think that our kids are kind of, an example of that, and that's not to say something couldn't have gone wrong along the way. I mean,
No,
it
of
it cer-
course.
it, it certainly could have. But I remember asking, and we'd had many, many conversations since he was probably 11 or 12 about sex and healthy relationships and pornography. And I asked him, so I said, what do you think about porn? I said, I just want to know, what do you think about porn?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he goes, Mom, I don't watch that stuff anymore. He goes, it F's with your brain. And I was like,
He
wow.
made a critical thinking choice to take himself out of that space.
What he was seeing was not mirroring what we've talked about as healthy relationships.
Yeah, beautiful.
He needs to trust, he trusts, thankfully, he trusts me enough that what I'm telling him is the right thing. And what he's, seeing is, I don't care how many amateur tags you want to have, they're acting, for the camera or
Yeah,
whatever, that
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
of course.
entertainment, and this
That
is
yeah.
not real. This is,
He was
this is
able to
not
make
real
up that
life.
decision on his own because you'd given him enough information and enough, reasonable information. And yes, there's trust there, but you helped him critically think through the fact that,
He
is
had
this
those
safe? Is
tools,
this
right?
healthy? Is this a healthy relationship? Does it portray how I want my relationships to be?
Hmm.
All of those things. And I think and so he was able to make that decision for himself because of all that groundwork from a very young age.
Right, exactly. Having all that information and all those tools, and just like we were talking about with kids being able to help kids, I think, that's a conversation that can happen within
Yeah,
them as
it does.
well,
Yeah.
and so at every age, that education helps and spreads amongst the kids,
Yeah.
so yeah. Um,
And that's what I talk about in my book, in my conversations with kids cards. I'm actually writing a new book now, but that's what I talk
oh,
about is that it evolves. You create the foundation and the base,
hmm,
and then you add on a little bit more, and you add on a little bit more, and you add on a little bit more, and then your child feels safe. If they feel
hmm,
confident, they feel empowered, and yes, something can happen, but they know what to do when it happens. They know what to say. They know who to go to, and so it's taking out that lack of control because they know that they can do something about it. And so we talk about, and the question I get all the time is, I don't want to scare my kids. Kids are more scared of not knowing what to do and how to help themselves. We need to teach kids how to help seek and how
yeah,
to find help when they need it. If they don't understand what's happening, and one of the grooming techniques is to gamify things, to make it a game so that
hmm,
children think that they're just playing a game, and they just want to because children just want to be loved, and they want to please, and they're very easily manipulated, and they don't
yeah,
if they don't understand what's happening, they just do. It's easier because at the end of the day, and what a lot of people don't really consider is how vulnerable our children are, because
hmm,
nothing that happens in their world or in their lives is controlled by them. We choose what they
hmm,
eat, they wear, where they live, who they get to see, which schools they go to, which daycares they go to. We choose every part of their lives from a very young age, and it's only when they start getting older that they might get some say in some stuff, or they might complain about some stuff, and we might adjust or not adjust, whatever. But ultimately, it's their body, their life, their choice. We have to make those choices when they're little, but I think it's about helping kids understand that they are, that we should be asking consent and modeling what safe adults do. Like, this is the other
hmm,
part of the equation. Us as individuals and parents should be modeling what safe adults do. Safe adults don't make you feel uncomfortable. Safe adults don't make or scared. Safe adults don't ask you to keep secrets. Safe adults don't ever, always ask before they ask for a hug, ask for a kiss, ask for a cuddle, ask for, they give you an option. You never have to do what you never have to when it involves your body and your bodily space.
right.
No one forces you to do anything. And when we model that over and over and over again, when someone does something outside of that safe adult space, then instantaneous they know to say something because we've taught them that.
I'll tell you something from my personal experience. So my son was probably uh, he was 5 years old, and I had my mental break. I had a lot of bad things happen all at the same time, and I just lost it. And it took me a good 10 years to kind of get to that next side. I'd say after probably 5 years, I was mainly halfway through, but I would still have periods of explosive rage, where it was just all of a sudden I had too many emotions inside, and it just and generally the trigger is going to be something innocuous really that
Yeah.
my son is doing, and that I yelled. And I will never forget this. My son looked at me, and I was just screaming, and I knew I sounded like a lunatic. I mean, and I knew I should stop, but I
Yeah.
could. That tidal wave was
Yeah.
going, and I could not stop that tidal wave. And he looked at me and he said, "Mom, I do not feel safe with you right now. Can I call? Can I call Nana and Papa?" And not you want to talk about frozen. I mean, that tidal wave just went, and
Yeah. It would have snapped you out of it quick.
oh my gosh, did it? And I can't, I mean, broke my heart. But on the other side, I was so glad that he knew to
How to
be
say
able to
that.
say
And he
something
felt
like
safe
that.
enough to say it. I mean, he might not have felt safe in his body in that moment, but he knew that you would hear that and you would do something about it.
Yeah. Or that, he was going to go for my phone, and he was going to try and extract himself from that situation because what I was doing was not okay.
Yeah.
Um, it goes back to, Crystal made a comment that she wouldn't even know what her private parts were because she was never told. And you hear this from survivors all the time who are raised in abuse, that they didn't know it wasn't normal because it was their normal.
Yeah.
And so it's just till you start comparing it to other people's experiences,
Yeah.
Unless kids have something different, something healthy, to a healthy
Model.
model, or at least healthy, words that you're
Yeah.
giving, at least if you're explaining it to them, um,
It just takes
they're
one
not just
person too.
not going to know any different.
And I just want people to know that it just takes one person. The child, and I say this to teachers and to educators all the time, they might not have a safe home, but one person in their life, be it a teacher, an educator, a social worker, a counselor, whatever, but if that person shows them what it's like to be respected, given consent, it can change the whole part. It can change everything because
Yeah.
they see it, and that it might not, and I know this from my own experience, it might not be in the moment but it will be there in the background going, no, this isn't okay. What was okay isn't okay. It's not until someone shows you that this is how you should be treated, this is how you should be, and it only takes one person. So but I think, just to round out the conversation, we have so much power to prevent abuse, and we have so much power to reduce harm. We know, as survivors, as victims, as survivors, and people who have been through this type of trauma, that you can, it takes time to heal and survive this. So the quicker we can get to the healing part. So if a child knows, and in my experience, the kids who told someone faster were the ones who had this education, who knew exactly what was going on. They knew to speak to someone, and literally that trauma gets to be healed immediately. It gets closed off. It's like that. It's not, from my experience, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, it doesn't come back, and you don't have moments of like anger and pain and all of that. But when you've got safe, healthy, and respectful adults in your life that listen to you, believe you, and make you feel safe again, then you can get on with being a child and getting on with your life. Yes, it's something that happened to you, but from my experience, seeing the kids that they had those moments where they're like, how dare that person do that to me, but they don't have that long-term trauma, that open wound that feels impossible to heal. So the quicker we can do that, the better.
I do want to ask you one question from the standpoint of, community involvement, and that being just everybody. So as a parent, as the parent of your, son's best friend, as the coach, as a teacher, if we're seeing a child who is, what are the signs and signals that we should be looking for in a child to say, maybe there's something going on here and I need to talk to this child, or I need to talk to the child's parents and find out, because I'm thinking something might be off?
Yeah. So one of the big ones, or a couple of the big ones, are if the child all of a sudden starts not wanting to be around that person. So if they leave the room when that person walks into the room, or they avoid them, or they don't seem thrilled to see them all of a sudden, or at all anymore. They might have been joined at the hip, and now that they don't want anything to do with them, big red flag, warning sign. That for the child especially, sometimes harmful sexualized behaviors, especially in young children, or is a red flag, warning sign that something's not right. I mean, we know that it could be pornography, but it could also be abuse. So we need to find out, or someone needs to find out what's going on, where it's come from. And then, like just that, a lot of adults say to me all the time, something wasn't right, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. Well, if you can't put your finger on it and you just have that feeling, don't ignore it. Start digging. Ask questions. Say, hey, is everything going okay? Hey, I noticed that you've not, and like there's sometimes a real big change in behavior, or in personality. Like they go from being really happy to really like, or one of the other signs that I've seen is a really dysregulated child, which kind of didn't have a lot of, very boisterous and outgoing, etc. All of a sudden becomes very controlling. and they become very like everything has to be perfect, everything has to be on time, everything has to be exactly like OCD almost.
Controlling what they can in their environment.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's about massive changes in behavior. Behavior is a form of language. So if a child changes a complete 180 flip of personality overnight,
Yeah.
or complete 180 flip, then you know that, or something is not right, whether it's abuse or not, something is not right with that child in their space. They could be
Grade
getting bullied
slipping.
online. They could be getting, anything. So
Yeah. There's a problem.
there's a problem,
There's
and
something.
they're trying for you. They want someone to see it. I know the victim survivor that I spoke to on my podcast yesterday. He was saying that multiple times he tried to get someone to pay attention, and no one did. So he even fully disclosed abuse to people, and they just ignored it. Like, I'm talking
Right.
the 70s and 80s. So
Yeah.
people weren't great back then, but still, he literally was. He was displaying harmful sexualized behaviors. He was talking to, he was telling people about his abuse from not like the fact that he because he was a boy, should I say?
Yeah.
He wasn't even a man. He got high-fived by a coach that he was treated like, and he was, behavior-wise, he was terrible, had really bad behavior. A lot of victim survivors on my podcast have said that they were trying to tell people through bad behavior and were labeled the bad child.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important that we pay attention. And when someone's not themselves, then asking a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Crystal had just a last little thing. Crystal had a comment way before, and she was asking about average sentences in Australia, and what are those
not great.
like? Okay.
Not great, but mind you, they're sort of limited. The sentencing is anywhere from nothing to, 2, 3, 6 years. Very rarely do we see anything over 10 years, only if there's multiple victims, like it's seen as massive child exploitation, like people who possess and download child exploitation material, like it's very limited sentencing. I think it's the same for like the UK, Canada, Australia, because we're all part of the Commonwealth, similar judicial system, justice system. So, and one thing that most people don't understand is that the sentencing in these countries is dictated by previous sentences. So if a judge was to sentence someone for, like, say, for instance, the average sentence is usually around 4 years or 3 years, and then they sentence someone for this similar offense and they give them 12, then it would be open to appeal for being over and above, the terminology is evading me right now, but it's inherently excessive, I think is the word they use. So they are really stuck with how off, like, what they can sentence with. And personally, I would like to see, before I leave this earth, that I bring in minimum sentencing. I think in Australia we need a minimum sentence for child sex offences, minimum sentencing. And so basically they can't give if they're found guilty, they can't give a sentence lower than that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have something similar. Crystal has mentioned, and my research has borne out their average is 2-3 years. But you've definitely heard of people getting off on probation still, and even within the last 10 years. And every state is different here in the United States, but in Michigan, where I live, you've got your maximum, which is set by statute.
Yeah, same.
But the minimum is based on your prior offenses and the offense variables. So there's a list of like 20 offense variables. And so if there's, violence or harm, and to me, some of those should be just an automatic tick on every single one for, trauma cases, because they're so obvious. But yeah, if you've got a first time offender versus somebody who's a repeat, it's going to be, different. So
same here. But we have something called So if a child's under the age of 13, it's like a circumstances of aggravation. So then it
Mhm.
increases their penalty. But again, it really does not matter. Like
Yeah.
it seems like they, I've said this before, child sexual abuse can be a life sentence for the victim. And
Mhm.
the justice system has not truly caught up with how devastating child sexual abuse is. If they had, they would be sentencing people for way more than what they do. And, it affects every part of a child victim's life. We have research that says that a victim of child sexual abuse has a high rate of mortality in middle age. So their high rate of
Yes.
death in middle age. There's so
Mhm.
many, higher rates of mental health illness, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of every part of their
Yeah.
lives, we're hopefully getting better. This is why prevention is such a big part of this space,
Mhm.
and speaking up, letting kids know that they've got a safe space to come to, because that's the only thing that's going to prevent it and stop it.
Do you have time for one more question?
Sure, I'll try.
Just has to do with law enforcement, either during the time that you were on the force or what you've seen in the last 6 years.
Yep.
One, is trauma informed training mandated, or how often do you think that that happens within law enforcement?
Not enough. No, it's not
Mm,
mandated.
okay.
I did, when I was in the child abuse squad, I had a psychology appointment or interview for an hour the first day, like week, and then I had one after a critical incident, and it's optional. Like you can say no. So they check in
Mm,
with you and say, look, you've just been through a critical incident. So if I've been to a murder or whatever, and we're just checking your mental health. The thing about policing is that it's quite frowned upon. Like everyone is petrified that if they mention that they've got an issue with their mental health, that they will get taken off the road and they won't be able to go and be a police officer. They'll get stripped of their badge or whatever, that they will get taken off general duty policing. And so most police officers are going through hell in their mental health or in their home life, and they're not talking to anyone because they're scared that they won't be able to do their job anymore, because it's their whole identity and it's
yeah.
their whole life. And they so mandated no. I think since I've left, it's gotten a little bit better. I only saw my mental health and well-being section of the police when I was when I mentioned to that I had anxiety, and I took 3 weeks off from, and that was
Mhm.
9 months or 7 or 8 months before I left the police. So I had to go and see the health and
Yeah, way
welfare.
towards the end.
Yep. And that was the first time I'd ever been to the mental health unit. So, and in actual fact, they were like, you've done everything that you could possibly do. You're speaking up about it. You're being honest. And yet I felt so absolutely horrible. I felt like I was failing. I felt like I was letting down my team. I felt like I was riddled with guilt. I remember sending a message to my whole team, apologizing to them for being away. Like,
Yeah.
20 people saying, I'm so sorry that I'm not well and I can't be at work. I feel really bad. And that was me. That was my anxiety, because I
Yeah.
felt like I was
Talking.
letting
Yeah.
everyone down. So,
Mhm.
no, not enough. Definitely not enough. And I think it might have made a difference had it been a lot more trauma informed and better.
Well, I'd love to have you back sometime to talk a little bit more about secondary trauma, because
Sure.
I think not only for police officers, but for detectives, for people who are interviewing, but I'm also thinking about all those forensic people and the
Mm.
detectives as well, who have to go through, say, videos that
Yeah.
come through, whether it's kids or adults. And also I'm thinking about juries. What
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
some of these juries who end up watching or getting pictures and just seeing material
So
and
traumatizing. And
yeah,
vicarious trauma, that secondary trauma you're talking about, vicarious trauma is
yeah,
massive.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd love to have another conversation with you sometime. But
Sure.
thank you.
That'd be
I've
great.
taken up so much of your morning already, and I really
That's okay.
appreciate it.
I've
Um,
had a great chat.
Thank you so much for being on, guys. Kristi McVie from Australia. Her contact information is in the video description. She's got her book. She's got her little
My
prompt,
cards.
her card
Yeah. The
that you can
Conversations with Kids
find.
card. Yeah.
Conversation
And
with
they
Kids.
come, yeah. And then I've got my podcast if anyone wants to hear more about, what parents can do. And it's based around parenting, but talking to victim survivors and experts in this field. So
That's all wonderful. So all her information is in the video description, guys. Go there. You can check it out and you can contact her if you need. You can get through her with LinkedIn. Thank you so much. And I will definitely be talking to you later. Happy holidays and best.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks. Bye. All right, guys. I really want to have another discussion with her talking about secondary trauma for law enforcement people, for the forensic people who are in law enforcement, um, and for juries. I was watching a documentary yesterday. It was about a serial killer, actually, but and I just noticed I did not put the trigger warning up at the beginning, but hopefully I announced what we were going to be talking about. So um, I should have done that. You guys got to smack me upside the head and remind me to do that sometimes if I forget. Um, excuse me. But that jury had to watch 14 very explicit videos. And I was thinking about our discussion today, and I was thinking about how that must have affected them, and how I do not know of any place that has follow-up services for people who are actually, doing their civic duty for this. So, um, yeah, lots of different things that I got going around in my head today, actually, and I think my sickness is starting to get to me today. I'm gonna be going to bed early. But thank you all for joining me. If you haven't, hit that like button on your way out. If you're watching replay, make sure you do so before your replay is over. If you guys can leave a comment, I'd love to know. Did you learn? Is there something that you learned today? Is there a point that was brought up that you're like, oh, I never thought about that before? I would love to find out and see what you guys thought about this. We're definitely going to be doing more of these types of interviews on all different subjects throughout the new year. Um, We've got holidays coming up, but before that happens, I will be back on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's our next time. So until then, please remember you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are loved just the way you are for who you are. So hugs and love from me. Mwah. We'll see you guys later. Surviving together, never alone.
Through the fire, through the rain, we have walked through endless pain, but we stand, we rise again, stronger now, we break the chain, surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. Every tear, every scar tells the story of who we are. Not just survivors, but warriors too. With love as our armor, we see this through. We see you, we hear you, and we believe We hear you, and we believe in you. Surviving together.